Thank you for coming. Lovely to see you here tonight. What I usually do is I just talk a little bit about the book, and then I do a little bit of a reading, and then we can just have any questions, anything you're interested in to do with the book or writing or whatever. Fauna, this is the hardcover, quite different from the paperback. Both are quite lovely, but in their own way. And I guess the question that I get asked maybe the most often is, as a writer in general, is where do your characters come from? So I'll just talk a little bit about that with this particular novel. They come from all different directions. And Erica mentioned Edel. So she's effectively the main character. And she works as, yeah, she may or may not have you read the book. So sometimes people have arguments about who the main character is, and I love that. Because I do tend to follow different viewpoints and kind of weave them all together. But we'll start with Edel anyway. So for those of you who don't know Toronto at all, the city is built on a series of ravines that are coming down to the lake, rivers coming down to the lake. And one of these ravines is the Don Valley. It kind of separates downtown from the East End. I live in the East End on the eastern side of the Don Valley. And so even before I moved back to Toronto, I had crossed over this valley many, many times. And one of the bridges that goes across is called the Bloor Street Viaduct, and the subway goes across there. So you're underground, you're kind of deprived of any kind of view for a long time, and then suddenly you shoot out over this valley. And every single time I find it quite thrilling. Now there's a highway down there, and there are train tracks, and it's an urban space, but it's also home to a river and a forest. And so moving over that space, I think long before I ever started working on this novel, was working on me, working on my imagination. And various characters kind of rose up out of that space. A lot of them were waifs and strays of one sort or another, human or animal. And you mentioned the wrecking yard as well. So this kind of sanctuary space began to develop in relation to the valley and to these creatures and humans who needed some kind of sanctuary. And it, for some reason, became an auto wrecking yard. I don't know why. So Edel is one of these people who finds her way to the auto wrecking yard. The auto wrecking yard is run by a guy named Guy Howell. He's named after Guy Lafleur. Even though his uncle was a Leafs fan, he loved Guy Lafleur. And, but because it's Ontario, of course, he's Guy. And there's another question I get often is where do you get the names for your characters? And Guy, for the longest time, I couldn't come up with a name for him. It was like I was just holding it and waiting until the name would show up. And then having dinner with a friend, and she said, oh yeah, my brother Guy, you know, my parents named after Guy Lafleur. Of course, they can't call him Guy, so he has to go by Guy. And I thought, perfect, that's his name. No wonder I've been waiting. So Guy is a kind of an unusually benevolent leader who runs what is effectively an informal community center, although it's really just his home and his wrecking yard. It functions as a place that builds community. It builds community in a few different ways, but chiefly through people caring for other people and for creatures, through sharing meals, very informally, and through sharing stories. So there's a lot of sharing books and reading aloud and this kind of thing that goes on, again, in a very informal way at the auto wrecking yard. And this is one reason why I was so thrilled to have Fauna chosen as the One Book Nova Scotia book, because these One Book programs are so wonderful, right? This idea of getting back to people forming community through a shared story. Something that we human beings do naturally, right? But as our groups get bigger and bigger, we get more and more splintered and so many different stories in our heads all the time. So for me, the idea of people sharing a story is really exciting. And they do that in this small community in my book. You think of a whole province doing that with this group of characters who are doing that in the book. It's just lovely for me. And then there's the whole thing of getting to tour around Nova Scotia, which is something I've always wanted to do and never managed until now, so that's also pretty cool. So Edel, where did Edel come from? I have to go back to my early childhood for that one, but I'll put it in a nutshell. My folks came from Australia to northern Alberta. They came from a big city, Australia, and ended up in small town northern Alberta. And my dad ended up teaching what they call outdoor education. So there he is, grew up as a surfer, and now he's teaching Canadian kids how to canoe and hunt and fish and all this kind of stuff. And so that's a big part of our upbringing, myself and my brother. And my brother ended up becoming a conservation officer in BC. And I ended up writing about wilderness and wildlife a lot. So even when I wrote my Toronto novel, I ended up writing a lot about wilderness and wildlife within the city. My brother, on the other hand, does it for real and deals with all of these aspects of wildlife management and tells me amazing stories. He gives me great material, and he's also great research. You know, I can call him up and say, now if someone was using that kind of shotgun, what would happen if, or if they're in this using that kind of outboard motor. He's a great resource, but he also just tells me wonderful stories. Some of them are scary stories about busting poachers, and he for years has been telling me about the trade in what they call pets and parts. So the illegal trade in animals living and dead, and parts of animals. So we all know about the legal trade of ivory, and we all heard recently the tragic story of these two boys who were killed by the African rock python. And it comes into the news every now and then. You get this idea that this is going on in the world. But did you know, I didn't, that it is the second most lucrative. Did you want me to use the mic?
Yeah, I think we're going to compete with the brownies.
Oh, the brownies are here. Yeah, I'll need a mic. So yeah, second most lucrative illegal trade in the world after drugs. Before weapons even. People are making more money off of rhino horns and ivory and snake skins and all kinds of coats made out of ocelot and what have you. Check, check, check. She's not on.
Yes, it is.
Yep, the internal switches. Go ahead.
You guys can hear? All right. I'm going to do a number now. I've got the mic. The hell is the book? Yeah, so Edel came from hearing those kind of stories. So what I was most interested in was this idea of busting people at the airport, the people who were smuggling living animals and their products in. And basically, well, she became a federal wildlife officer, which is the federal equivalent to what my brother does. And so for part of my research, I read a lot, but for part of my research, I went and did a tour at Environment Canada's enforcement branch, which was an amazing tour. They took me into their evidence room and showed me all the stuff that they confiscate, which was mind-boggling. The number of things that people make out, like cobras in jars and sort of like weird cobras pickled in brandy and just anything you can imagine. It's such a weird insight into human nature and what we're up to in the world, right? Like, who would wear those alligator skin pants? I don't know. They're the ugliest thing I've ever seen. It's so beautiful on an alligator, right? That skin is actually gorgeous on an alligator, but you put it on a big old pair of pants. Anyway, an amazing place to visit. And they also had their live evidence room. When I was there, it just had a few turtles in it. But, you know, they have their snake handling kits and all kinds of crazy job. And the stories that the fellow who was giving me a tour, who was the district manager, the stories he told me just, you know, like imagine, I don't know if you have ever seen, what do they call it? An eagle? No. Harpy eagle. A harpy eagle from the Amazon. Just these enormous birds of prey with these huge, you know, sort of headdresses and feathers. They're incredibly beautiful and huge, and they're incredible predators. I mean, they take big howler monkeys, right? And so he actually unpacked one of those in somebody's suitcase that someone had folded up like a sweater and just broken its wings, like alive. Put it in and said, well, you know, we'll just pack it up and so this kind of stuff. So this influenced this character of Edel, and she's got her own personal problems, but a certain amount of what's happened to bring her to this place of sanctuary is just the tragedy that she deals with in her job. And if you can imagine, the people who are drawn to these kinds of jobs are generally people who love animals, right? So for someone who loves animals to be making those kind of discoveries at work is pretty hard. So that's Edel. And she ends up finding her way to the wrecking yard. Someone else who finds her way to the wrecking yard is a teenage runaway named Lily. And she's actually living down in the valley. And you know, as I was developing her character, I just came to the conclusion that I couldn't let her be down there on her own. Like I just couldn't stand it. I mean, I hate the thought of anybody living like that on their own. And part of how this happened that I was thinking about is, of course, when you're going back and forth across Don Valley, thinking, what's living down there? What kinds of creatures are living down there? But then you start to see campsites and tarps, and you realize there's human habitation going on in those woods down there. And that got me thinking along those lines. And I began to think of this character, Lily, who lived down there. But as I say, I couldn't stand for her to be alone, so I gave her a best friend. And his name's Billy. I think I'll just read you a tiny little portion about them. So Lily, I'll just tell you another part that, something else that led to the development of the character of Lily was, years before I was living in Toronto, a friend told me about the fact that the downtown business district is built right on a major bird migration route in Toronto. So you know that feeling you get when a bird hits the window. And, you know, 1 million a year in Toronto in the migration seasons hit those buildings. Now, they don't all die. So that's a terribly sad thing, right? That, you know, when I heard that, I was just like, oh, God, what are we doing? Then on the positive side, turns out there are people who go down there with flashlights, you know, before dawn, looking for the survivors. Because the survivors, even if they're just stunned, if they try and fly again, you know, they get trapped again and they hit another window and they can't make their way out. So there are people who go down there and find the survivors. Some of them even pick up the dead and bury the dead, which is lovely to think of. I'm just going to leave those. That's not garbage. That's, you know, that's a bodied creature. They're going to go and bury it. But they pick up the survivors and they take them to open ground and give them a chance to carry on. So I love that idea. So that was part of, that helped to develop who Lily is as well. So I'll just, normally she's hanging out in and around the valley and the wrecking yard. And she gets a job for a while working in a Chinese restaurant as a dishwasher. But we'll catch up with her early on in the book when she's down in the business district. I'll just read you a couple of pages. He's found another one. She could tell by his low, snuffling look. Lily loves the shape he makes, shaggy and substantial, true black against the Canada Trust Tower's glimmering granite wall. She knows a stab of pride. His coat is impressive, even here in the eerie aquarium light of the business district before dawn. What you got, Billy? Crouching down, she cups the ruched, wet velvet edging of his lips. His breath is jungly. As she feels up over the points of his teeth, he relaxes his jaw, delivering the small, feathered body into her grasp. She drops a kiss on his wet, black nose. Good boy. She rises, closing the bird in her palms. It's alive. Certainty palpable. Any more? He sets to work again, nosing along a planter's edge, disturbing ghostly petunias with his snout. Lily follows him to the corner, where Bay Street stretches north into spotlit gloom. She can make out the slow swooping arc of a flashlight, maybe a block away. A few minutes, no more, before they ought to be moving on. Warming the bird a little longer in her hands, she turns to look west along Front Street, wide and quiet, save for the taxi line out front of Union Station, shrunk to a mere 3 cars. Medium gardens stand like skinny tropical islands, palm leaf shadows, flowers lying low. Maybe they'll try there next, cross 3 deserted lanes to pick a path along the concrete rim. Birds that live through the impact often make their way to the nearest patch of green. Across Bay, The Royal Bank Tower shows a sensible black hem of 3 or 4 stories before rising in golden knife-edged pleats. Its heights betray the first red hints of sunrise. Gulls are beginning to circle up from the lake. A fat one lands close by, stretching, then stowing its wings. It rotates its snowy head Lily's way, eyeing her carefully clasped hands. Creep, she murmurs. Pressing the stunned little body to her chest, she frees a hand and unsnaps her right cargo pocket. The hunting vest isn't much to look at. Chip brown and big enough to hold 2 of her, but it's lightweight and warm, and all those pockets mean she generally has what she needs. The Tim Hortons bag is used but clean. She shakes it open and slips the bird inside. So that's Lily down in the business district. And yeah, Billy is just an enormous black Newfoundlander who has a little bit of something more vicious in him to help protect her. And he is called upon to protect her in that light. He's a very good best friend. It's a funny example of one of the things. There are many things that make their way into the book that you don't even really think about consciously, and oftentimes readers are the ones who point them out to you. And so someone had to say to me, oh, you must have grown up with big dogs. And before that, I had never made the connection. We did have an enormous dog when I was a little kid. We used to ride him. His name was Pompeius Maximus. And so much of my connection to Billy comes from that, and I didn't even get it, I didn't even know it. So it's lovely when readers reflect that back to you and tell you what's in your own book. It's kind of like getting the characters back after you have to give them up to the world, and you spend all this time with them, and then you kind of go, goodbye. And then a little while later, the readers start to bring them back to you and tell you what they connected with and what this reminded them of, and so on, and then it feels okay again. All right, so Lily makes her way there, Edel makes her way there. There's another guy there, he's kind of an unofficial apprentice, and his name's Stephen, and he's a soldier. He's a young soldier, and he's on medical release. He basically did most of a tour of duty in Afghanistan, and then his heart gave out on him, basically, physically and metaphorically speaking. And he came from there's so many different directions that ways that people will be born out of something you heard. So in his case, Stephen came out of an interview that I heard on CBC Radio years before I ever set to work on this book. I heard Michael Enright on CBC talking to a young soldier. This young man had decided to become a Marine. He was Canadian, but he wanted to be a Marine because he had this idea, I want to be the ultimate soldier. And his reason for doing that was that he had been the kid in school who had looked after the kids that other people, that were getting picked on, kids who were being bullied. And this was in a time sort of before people started talking about trying to do something about bullying in schools. So on the one hand, he was doing this at school every day. He was a kind of a policeman in the playground. And then he would go home, and his parents were pacifists. And they would say to him, this is wrong, it's wrong of you to fight, and all of these things. And then he would go back to school, and there would be all these weaker children being picked on. And he would fight again for them. So he made the choice to try and do that in his life. And then, of course, went forth into the world to try and protect the weak, and discovered just how hard that is in the scheme of things in the world. So he ends up basically becoming an apprentice of sorts. And one of the ways in which he's working to heal himself, not on purpose, not because the book told him to, but because it's what feels right, is he's bringing up some orphan raccoons. And as you know here, we're very short of raccoons in this country. We need to make sure that they're all looked after and brought up. And in Toronto, everybody will tell you there's a family of raccoons in their backyard, and if it's not in their backyard, it's in their neighbor's backyard. And they can be very pesky. I will not deny it. We had the raccoon latrine on the back porch and to deal with that situation. But I still love them. And they really enrich my experience of being in an urban setting every time I see them. That's Stephen. One more person finds her way to the sanctuary of the wrecking yard, and that's Kate. And she works as a veterinary technician. And how she came about was one of the more unexpected. She was a little bit later on, and I kind of thought I already had the main characters in the book, and then a friend who works in a veterinary hospital said the phrase canine hydrotherapy. And I thought, wait a minute now, has anyone had any dealings with canine hydrotherapy? Occasionally there will be somebody in the audience who's like, oh yeah, because their dog had an operation and then had to have physiotherapy. And I mean, of course it's not covered too, so this isn't something that everybody can get, right? This is high-end treatment for your dog. So as soon as she said that, she was talking about one of her colleagues who is always going around in her wetsuit. And I thought, canine hydrotherapy, and she wears a wetsuit. So right away I had these visions of women swimming with dogs to help them heal. And I saw this big pool by moonlight, and it was all very romantic and fascinating and weird. And I started writing the scene in my head and said, oh, I've got to come down there. And I don't know, I guess I wasn't listening to her. She wasn't telling me what I needed to know. But I showed up looking for the pool. No pool. This is not what they do. They have a big tank, like a big fish tank. And in the tank there's a treadmill. So the dog goes in and they bring the water up around the dog and it takes the weight off. So the dog can run without putting strain on the healing hip or knee or both. But it's a lovely thing to see. I was disappointed, and then I spent a day there, and I ended up being completely thrilled and coming up with scenes, and yeah, it ended up being a really good thing. So very often I'm following things that I don't understand. Things that I always draw this drawing when I'm teaching creative writing. I'll do the drawing of like your daily brain. It's about that big, and then there's your writing brain, which is way outside your head, much bigger than you are, much smarter than you are. And a lot of the work that we have to do is following that big brain where it'll go and not knowing why. Because it does know more than we do, usually. And then I guess I'll just briefly tell you about one last character who he connects very deeply actually with wildlife, but in a different way than the other characters do. And he doesn't really find sanctuary. And, stories need a villain, right? There's always a villain, there's always an antagonist. And it's partly because that's how narrative works, we need the tension, but it's also partly because it's just how we understand how life works, right? Not everybody has our best interests at heart. Everybody's damaged in their own way, but some people are more on the broken end of the scale. And so there's this character of Darius. And he grew out of a certain amount of research that I did about people who are destructive towards wildlife and who are hateful in their approach to wildlife, even violent. You run across stuff on the web that is quite scary. But he also, more importantly, kind of grew out of something from my own family lore about my great-grandfather, who I never met, and I just heard 3 things about him over the years. So he was a very religious man, but not in the way where religion taught him about love. He went the other way. He was very cruel to his family. So that was the second thing I knew. And the third thing I knew about him was that when he became older and developed a stoop, started to walk out like this, he strapped himself to a board with belts, the board down the back of his trousers and then belts. And somehow for me, that image just stuck with me as a child and kind of haunted me. There was something sort of Frankenstein's monster-esque about that image. And I would see him sort of like coming, down the hallway to the kids. And so for me, when it came time to create this character of Darius and see the villain behind my villain, his grandfather came came about. And he scared me. Yeah, it might sound like lots of sad stuff happening in the book, true, but also lots of love. I hasten to assure you. And the last sort of narrative thread that I should really mention is, you know, from the beginning I was thinking about the wildlife in the city and thinking about the life in, you know, in that bush that you're walking past and not thinking about, and there's a creature living in there and they might even be watching you. So there's a narrative thread that I just kind of call mammal vision, and that takes us inside the eyes of various creatures that share Toronto with humans, and no doubt share Truro and Halifax, and you know, and so there's some raccoon vision and some bat vision and squirrel vision and fox vision and coyote vision, and so my idea with that was just to kind of get in those bodies and look out through those eyes and give those paths through this neighborhood as well, and how they crisscross with the human paths and are part of that same story, even though so often we don't see them and think about them. I will read a tiny bit about one animal, maybe the squirrel. So very often you hear about, you know, there'll be a blackout. I don't know if this happens here because you mostly have the red squirrels, right? I've seen some red squirrels. No black squirrels. Yeah, no black squirrels or gray ones. So in Toronto, we have a few chipmunks, but it's mostly the eastern greys, and the black ones are a morph of eastern greys. And so I was reading all about them and learning about them. And one thing that I learned that I loved was that the black ones tend to be calmer. So that they've done these tests, right? And they've just noted, and there's all these theories, right? Oh, well, they're better camouflaged, they don't need to be as skittish, they don't run as much or whatever, but I love that idea, right? It's actually the same species, but the black ones tend to be mellower than the gray ones. So you'll often hear about, there'll be a blackout and they'll say, oh, you know, there was a squirrel in one of the transformers. And people are, damn squirrels, inconveniencing us again. And I always think, well, the squirrel's dead, right? that squirrel came out of it much worse than we did, so maybe your fridge doesn't run for a couple hours. So I thought I would write a bit about some squirrels, and one of the best things they get up to, if you've ever, I don't know if the red ones do it, but the gray ones have this amazing mating chase that they do, if you ever catch them. So I'll read to you a little bit about some squirrels. The female is gray, but her belly is pale as gold, the color of a fresh peanut freed from its shell. His own coat is black, pure calm, save for the point of white awareness at the tip of his tail. The gray ones tend to be flighty. She's taken refuge in a tree hole for the time being, but he can still make out the twitch of her pretty tail. Between them, a chain of hopeful suitors jostle on the branch. The white-tipped male holds back. When the female leaves her hidey hole to lead them in the next leg of the chase, he'll be well placed head of the queue. He wasn't the first to answer her silent, scented call, though he's played that part with others in the past. The days-long tentative dance, the first hard-won sniff, the wild morning when she emerges with her perfume fully blown. Little can match the thrill of that initial burst of speed, the sight of her hindquarters bounding away. That's the best of it, though. First on the scene rarely seals the deal. No female wants the nearest male, a dull neighbor who might well be her own blood. She wants the fleet-footed outlier, the squirrel she barely knows. She wants him. And now, forsaking the tree hole in a flurry of softness, she offers him his chance. Following the trunk's impetus, she breaks for the leafy heights. The other males, a black and tan, two grays, and a straggler with a reddish tinge, follow her like a multi-toned tail. Meantime, the white-tipped male rises handily, limb to limb. Foresight pays off. He's the first to fall in behind her when she angles back along horizontal lines. The high branch bucks and sways, bearing her weight,
then his, then the mass of the other males, trailing for form's sake now, the race all but one. They're closing in on the female's territorial core. Any moment now, she'll show him how fast she can really run, put on a last maddening distance between her bright body and his, then crouch and awaken. First, though, there remains the small matter of a road. The female may be skittish, but she's no fool. She keeps to the high pathways, springing from her twig to the black line of a human wire. Absorbing her after bounce, the white-tipped male lets go on the upswing and sails splay-legged through the air. He lands in an echo of her landing, walks hand over hand in her steps. Her balance is a thing of beauty. She runs with a confidence bordering on madness, her small feet singing to him through the wire. So for me, my hope is always that after people read this, then they might feel sad when they've learned that a squirrel has been electrocuted. You all will, right? Now that you've heard that. Okay. So I will leave you with the Mammal Vision channel, and just ask if any of you have any questions or anything you're wondering about. Feel free. You're just waving. You don't have a question.
Why'd you write it so descriptively?
The question is, why did I write it so descriptively? That's a great question. I feel as though the writing act is always it's this kind of magic that you're trying to do, because you have these pictures in your own head, and you're trying to get them into the head of the reader. And for me, that requires that I try to make the images as rich as I can, and make the language also as rich as I can, so that I have the best chance of taking them where I went in my mind as part of the imaginative process. So I spent a long time working on trying to get those descriptions really rich. Good question. Yeah.
At the beginning, when you were getting to know the characters, I was really uncomfortable for a while, because I wasn't sure what they were going to do with these animals. I was leading, and I was worried about saying to a place I didn't want to go. Was that your intention, or was that just my take on it?
So the question is, did I have an intention of sort of creating suspense of whether these people were going to treat the animals badly or take care of them properly? You know, I don't think it was my intention consciously, but I think that that's part of creating an environment where things are done informally, that it can be an uncomfortable place for people to go at first, because nobody's following any rules in how they're taking care of these animals, and I would be uncomfortable in person in that place until I figured out how things were really done. So it makes sense to me that you were like, yeah. And it's, I mean, you know, to me, stories where people, I mean, I hate that people are cruel to other people. I hate whenever I do it. And but you know, when you hear stories about people being cruel to animals, it's a really heartbreaking thing. And yet it's going on in the world all the time. And it was a part of what I was talking about in this book. So for me to have the place where that wasn't the way that it was done, and it was just understood, and that everyone who found themselves there understood that this place was about sanctuary and safety and caring, and that was really important. But it's interesting that you were a little uncomfortable, not consciously, but let's say that big writing brain probably did know. Yes. Well, you know, suspense is one of these things when you're writing a story, right? Suspense, if it's natural enough, it's a very positive part of narrative, because it keeps the reader drawn along, and it creates those bonds like I wonder and what if and oh no, and you're realizing you're caring more and more about those animals and the people and the place, and all that time it's becoming more real to you. And then it's the thing, if you manipulate it and you take it too far, it actually makes it less real to the reader. So it's a fine line.
Anybody else wondering anything at all? Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I like what you said about it being uncomfortable, because I never thought of that word, but I found that throughout the whole book, not just with the animals, but with the people too, that you're always like, oh no, what's going to happen with Lily, or what's poor little Darius going to, have to go through now. So, it was very uncomfortable in lots of places, but we're reading the book as a book club at the community college with some of the students there. And what, it's just a comment, really, not a question, but what makes it really a good book for a book club is that everybody has a story, just like you said, about an animal, and everybody has a connection in one way or another. So when we're talking, we talk about the book, but we talk a lot about our experiences with animals in our life as well. So it's kind of, it's not a, I wouldn't say it's a fun book, but it's a fun book to have for a book club.
And that people have reflected that back to me before, that it works well as a book club pick because it keys in on other people's stories, and because there are a lot of different issues that can be picked up on, in the book. So I'm glad that it's working out. And I'll tell you, my dad, when he was reading it, when it first came out, he phoned me up. He's the dog lover who goes into full mourning when his dog dies for years. He loves his dog so much. So he phoned me up, I don't know at what point in the book, and said, you have to tell me now if Billy dies because I can't continue reading the book. He's gonna die. And I said, I can't tell you, Dad. He said, you have to tell me. You have to tell me or I can't keep reading. And I won't tell you guys because I don't want to do any spoilers, but he forced me to tell him whether or not Billy died. And it's like that for me too, right? I don't always know everything that's going to happen, and that's when you know that the characters are really taking on a life of their own, and they're surprising you, and they're keeping you like, the closer it gets to how it is when we live and our life and we care about people, and these characters are all in a fairly precarious place in their lives, right? When you write a novel or a story, you don't choose all of time, you choose a certain period of time. It's going to start here, it's going to end here. And as far as backstory goes, I'm going to only include the things that are going to work with this narrative. And so, yeah, these people are all kind of coming together at a time of pretty intense times in their lives. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a dull spell.
Club would tell you that Lily is their favorite character.
So that comment was just that Lily is the favorite character of the book club.
And the best part is when she steals. We've been calling her Adele. It's Edel. Edel Spike.
Steals Edel Spike. Oh, that's so funny. I was thinking about reading that bit tonight. I'll just read the first couple lines. Yeah, Edel is down there, and Edel's bike is a treat to ride after the guy's junkyard clunker. Lily burns along the dark and valley trail, Billy working for once to keep up. And I love that scene too. That was a scene that really delighted me when it was finished. Because, Lily's had it hard. And she's still fighting for her life, but she's free now. And in that scene, she's really feeling her freedom. And she's there with her best friend, and they're loving each other and feeling great. And it made me really, so that's a joyful place in the book. It's really important to me too. Yeah. And it's interesting you say Lily's the favorite, because people often ask me, who's your favorite? And I always have, I feel so bad choosing one. But when I'm honest, it has to be Lily, because I think, partly just because I worry about her the most. I still pass her to the dog valley all the time. And she's a made-up person, right? But I still think about her down there. And of course, in doing that, I'm thinking about the people who are really down there too. Yeah.
Where did you come up with Coyote Cop and
Soldier Boy?
Soldier Boy. Where did you come up with that little blonde? Was that something you actually read, or was that just something of creativity of imagination?
So the question is, what starts to happen between Darius, who is our villain. He is on a mission to get coyotes out of the city. And he's self-styled, you know, savior of the city. And this is his mission. So he calls himself Coyote Cop and he starts this blog. And Stephen, our soldier on medical release, discovers this blog. And they get into a conversation through this blog. And really, when I first started thinking about it, I was just thinking about notes or posters left down in the valley. And then I thought, wait a minute, York. You know, it's whatever year it was then when I was working on it. Like, people want to write something, they're doing a blog. So I thought, well, is that possible? And how would Stephen find it? And, you know, figured all the stuff out. But once I started giving Darius that kind of a voice and giving Stephen the voice back and having the two of them talk to one another in that way, it felt really natural. Yeah, and there's a thing that can happen, particularly when you're writing in the first person, like I this and I that, as opposed to he and she. A voice can really take over and just do its own thing, and that really happened with those two.
I have to commend you on the last part that Soldier Boys stated on how you put like rodents or the rats and stuff like that into relevance as into the humans about giving birth to live, helpless young. We're all kind of the same. That was very good word.
Thank you. Yeah, just making those connections between ourselves and those animals that we often have contempt for because they're like us. You know, we think, oh, the mighty wolf out there in the wilderness, and we love the wolves and have a harder time caring about the coyotes. The coyotes are much closer to us than the wolves, much closer. The opportunistic, opportunivores they're called sometimes. I'll eat anything. Where is it? I can live anywhere. Okay, you're going to change that, and I'll change this. You can have a coyote, you know, there could be a coyote under this chair and you wouldn't know. That's how clever they are. They can be a problem, but you gotta love them. I see my hostess is standing and moving toward me.
We have time for one more question.
Oh yeah, we have to do the draw.
Well, just before we wrap up, I was wondering if you wanted to let us know the next book that you're working on.
Oh yeah. The novel that I'm working on now is set in the Amazon jungle, and it's set in the mid-19th century. So it's basically based on a fictional naturalist expedition going up the Amazon and up the Rio Negro. So it's been an absurd amount of research and a lot of fun to write. I'm still writing it. It's taking forever. Yeah, that's what I'm immersed in now. More animals, more humans. The usual. Lots of snakes.
Are you traveling the Amazon for research?
I did last summer. I went to the Amazon. It was amazing. I actually got in the water. You know, they give you this list of stuff to bring, and they're like, bathing suit and towel. Give me a break. I'm not going in there. But I ended up going in just in my shorts and t-shirt because I couldn't resist. And it was terrifying. Like, it was so hard to turn off my imagination. Everything I'd been looking into and learning about that was in that water. Anacondas, sharks, and stingrays, and piranhas, but it was great. It's really great.
Can I just ask you how long it took you to write this book?
How long did it take to write Fauna? It took, I guess, probably 2.5 years to 3 years. And the one before that was definitely 3 years. That was another historical one set in Utah in the mid-19th century. So I think it's usually 2.5 to 3 years, except for the one I'm working on now might even be longer than that. After that, I'm just going to write a simple novel with one protagonist set in my own backyard. That's the plan. I have one copy of Fauna to give away. I guess it's like it's a hassle to do ballots. So I am going to think of an animal, and whoever gets the closest animal to the one I'm thinking of, you'll have to trust me. But I'll think of an animal that people will have heard of. Give me a minute now. Okay. Okay, I've got the animal. So, what's your animal? What's your guess? Moose. It's pretty far. Okay. What's your animal?
gonna say dog.
Dog, okay. Yeah,
Horse.
horse,
Deer.
deer,
How about fox?
fox,
Bird.
a bird,
Otter.
an otter. Oh, okay.
Green anaconda.
Buddy got it dead on. Not just an anaconda, but a green anaconda. Wow. Okay, you guys didn't even get a chance. Was
I was
anyone?
gonna say green anaconda.
Were you going to say green anaconda? Be honest now. Were any of you going to say anaconda? All
I was
right.
gonna say.
Okay. Well, you were going to be second then. But he got green anaconda. Okay.
What, is that your guess?
Yeah, you won.
Oh my
Because I
God.
thought it before you did.
Yeah, you chose. Well, you probably put it in my mind. Not only did you win, but you're clairvoyant.
Okay.
So if anyone would like a novel signed, or come on up, and I'd be happy to sign it.
These old e-readers.
What's that?
These old e-readers.
Yes. I have signed an e-reader before.
Well, thank you so much.